Hey guys, the Kamsh here. As many of you know, the Grand Tournament expansion is coming out soon, which is going to be super sweet. But because of that, if I did a deck tech or just a general like meta analysis type thing today, that'd be kind of bad value for you guys since the expansion is going to come out. It's going to change a lot of things, and that deck tech probably won't be as relevant or as valuable anymore. So today we're going to talk about more of a general gameplay concept, and hopefully by next week the Grand Tournament will come out, or hopefully at least in the next 2 weeks, and then we can start doing awesome new deck techs and brews with those cards. So today we're going to be talking a little bit about mulligans, obviously very important to the game since every game of Hearthstone starts with that, and how you mulligan and what cards you look for like very much affect your win percentage. So a lot of you guys probably look at, since this is a Tempo Store video, if you guys go on TempoStorm.com, look for decks, notice a lot of them have Mulligan Guides, things of that nature. If you guys watch streamers, some of them, will talk about their mulligans, so on and so forth. But just like listening to someone talk about their mulligans or looking at a mulligan guide, obviously it helps and you know what cards to look for, but it's just as important to know why to look for those cards and the different value that those cards have. Really, that can only be acquired through a lot of gameplay experience with a deck, but today I'll just try to talk about some concepts and hopefully help shortcut some of those things for you guys. So the first point I would like to touch on is that some cards are significantly more important than others when you're mulliganing. So for example, let's look at like if you have a Hunter mulligan guide, it says, keep your Leper Gnomes, your Mad Scientist, keep all these 1 and 2 drops. So you have a hand of like 3 2-drops, you go, okay, these are all in the mulligan guide, we'll keep them, check, we're good to go. But sometimes cards are more important than others because if you're playing like Face Hunter, for example, you really need to have that 1-drop on turn 1 to start the early aggression and try to win the game. So even though all those 2-drops are on the list of cards you should keep, if you don't have a 1-drop, maybe you should throw all those 2-drops back and try to look for that 1-drop, because that 1-drop is going to be how you win the game. So even though all the cards in your hand are on the mulligan guide and you're like, yes, this is an ideal hand, sometimes you need to ship those to look for the really important cards. Cards have different values, different weights on how much you want them in your opening hand. So while you are okay with having some cards in your opening hand, you're really only okay with having those if you have other cards as well. And again, that can really only be determined through gameplay experience or watching streamers play the deck, so on and so forth. Another thing that comes up here is multiples. So having multiples of some cards is really valuable, like multiple 1-drops again in Face Hunter are great. But sometimes having multiples of a card isn't great, even if it is on the checklist. So you're like, okay, here I have these 2 cards, especially since you can't play them on curve. They're like 2 creatures, it's hard to curve out if you have like 2 3-drops that it says to keep. You're going to be playing a 3-drop on turn 4, which can be not great sometimes. So basically, even though you go, okay, but these 2 cards are both on the guide, check, you might want to ship one of them back depending on the deck you're playing. So different cards have different values, and mulligans are a lot more fluid than just like look for these cards. So all mulligan guides are really helpful and great. It's important to understand that they're not like, it's not just a checklist of cards you're looking for. And most people on Tempo Storm, when they write articles and create decks, they'll add little notes and you can read those to try to get more insight. Basically, it's important to remember that some cards are definitely more important than others when mulliganing, and even though you have a hand of cards that you want, you might want some cards more than others. The second point I'd like to touch on is that mulligans are, completely free. They're something you get to do, not something you have to do. And in Hearthstone, it's a lot more intuitive. In games like Magic the Gathering, you lose a card from your hand each time you mulligan, so you go from 7 to 6 to 5, so on and so forth each time you mulligan. It's still a choice you get to make, and it still helps improve. If you have an awful hand, you get to go to 6, and that's still good for you, rather than having to keep the awful bad hand. But in Hearthstone, since you're not losing any card advantage, mulligans are especially free. And so, if you have a bad hand and you mulligan some of it, that's bonus for you. It's resource free and giving you just a choice, like you get to do this, you get to stay on your current path, or you get to diverge from it, can never negatively affect your win percentage because you get a choice. Rather than something linear, so that's really helpful to you. So it's important to understand it's a tool, it helps you win the game, it's really good for you. It's not like something tedious you have to go through. And it won't hurt you unless you're like consistently making awful choices like mulliganing Fiery War Axes against the aggressive decks and things like that. As long as you are semi-competent with your mulligans, they will always help you in the game rather than hurt you. And while that's pretty obvious in Hearthstone, it's just something to touch on, that it is a resource and a tool rather than something bad. Third point, again, this one's pretty obvious, but mulligans are really matchup dependent. Don't just go like, oh, bingo, I got this card, it was great in the last matchup, we'll keep it here. Obviously, with some classes, you don't know whether they're playing like Handlock or Zoo, and you have to adjust accordingly. But if it's just different classes, and it's pretty likely you know what that class is playing. For example, Warrior is usually Patron Warrior now, so on and so forth. Look for the cards that correspond to that matchup rather than just looking for the best cards in your deck. My fourth point is really take your mulligans slowly, and I'm guilty of this. A lot of streamers are guilty of this. A lot of people, etc. Is that they do them really fast. They just snap them off, and they have lots of experience. And maybe some of the great pro players, like sure they can do that. Although in tournaments they still do them very slowly to think more and to not give away information. But for people who are playing at home, trying to get to Legends, so on and so forth, take as long as you need. Really think about the cards. Don't just like let your brain recognize, oh, this card was on the list, keep it, ship the rest, go. Take the time to think about what the card is, why you're keeping it, so on and so forth. Like really take the time to decide, okay, what do I think my opponent's playing? Why do I want these cards? What is their turns 1 through 3 going to look like? What cards do I want to make sure that I can counter whatever they're doing on those early turns? Is this card too slow to keep, so on and so forth? Really take the time to think. Don't just recognize the art or the name of the card, go, oh, this is good, I should keep this, X the rest, go. Really take the time to think. That's really important, and those extra few, 10, 20 seconds in the beginning of the game can really help you later on and can really help change the flow of the game later on. Another point I'd like to make is that, again, mulligans are determined only through a lot of practice. You have to play the deck a lot to really get close to getting perfect or pretty good mulligans every time. But if you start taking the time to know not only that a card is good, like I want Fire or War Axe, but understand why it's good, and with War Axe it's pretty easy. It gives you card advantage, helps eliminate your opponent's early drops, and you want to counter that. Once you start taking time to understand why you want those cards in your early hand, you'll think through all of your mulligans like that, and that'll really help you evolve as a player. And the last point I'd like to make is if your opponent's playing something, say Warlock, and you don't know whether it's Handlock or Zoo, then you should hedge your bets to give you the highest percentage against either of those decks. So obviously, it'd be great to have a calculator or something for this. Look at how many Zoo decks are currently in the meta, how many Handlocks decks are currently in the meta, and then keep the number of cards accordingly. But just hedge, for example, against you're against a Warlock, you're playing Patron Warrior, Control Warrior. You can keep Fiery War Axe because it's good against Zoo. It's bad against Handlocks. You're going to want another Handlock card too, so keep an Execute as well, which is fine against Zoo, great against Handlock, and then keep a BGH because Zoo can pull Mal'Ganis from Void Caller, and then it's great against Handlock. So keep 1 or 2 cards for each of the matchups. Don't just polarize your hand to be only anti-Zoo but immediately lose to Handlock, or only anti-Handlock and immediately lose to Zoo. Don't really polarize your hand against one of those, because if you guess wrong, it's just going to be a loss. And while that should even out eventually, if you're doing it every time for Zoo, you'll eventually play enough Zoo decks to even out that percentage. A lot of players don't have the time to play that many games to even that out and get that big of a sample size statistically. So you want to not polarize your hand against matchups where it could be either or, and really make it good against sort of the field. So again, you need a lot of practice to get good at mulligans, but these are just some tips or some insights that I have, and hopefully you can think a little bit about them, even if you disagree with me on a lot of points. Just hopefully if you take one thing away from this video, it's to take a little bit more time to think about your mulligans, since they really do affect the game, your win percentage, your rank as a Hearthstone player. So thank you for watching, guys, and come back next week, and hopefully pretty soon we'll be brewing with the Grand Tournament. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.